Thank you so much for staying with Daybreak. You're just in time for the newspaper review. Right after that, we're going to have a very different kind of conversation. It's not new. We've had this conversation before. Church and politics. The question we are asking you, and we'll bring it up on your screen, is does the church hold the moral authority in the society? We'd like to know your thoughts. 22422 is the SMS line, and Trevor Mbiji at Zinzi_K. The hashtag is Daybreak at Citizen TV Kenya as well. Does the church hold the moral authority in the society? We'll talk about religion and politics as well. As recently as just last week, an Embu priest was on the spot for allegedly endorsing the Tanga team and the DP William Ruto as well.
But when that was happening, there was also the other side of churches saying, listen, if our politicians visited our region as much as they visited the other region, the other 60 churches from a certain region, we would perhaps be not where we are. So could we have a piece of the cake? And
then there's also the big question, how do you call out someone who's corrupt and yet they're the people who are funding you as well in terms of contributions?
We'll get into that conversation.
Able to have that moral standing? That in just a bit, but before that we'll get into the newspaper review. Let's first introduce our guest. I'll start from my immediate left. Thank you so much for coming in, Bishop Alfred Rotich, member Catholic Justice and Peace Commission. Asante for coming in. Also followed by Joy Mdivo, Executive Director, East Africa Center for Law and Justice. I got that right this time, right?
Yes, you did.
Absolutely. And Dr. Wandia Njoya, Senior Lecturer, Daystar University and Academician as well. You'll tell us more about that. And David Osian, Governance and Public Policy Expert. Asanteni sana for making time this morning. Let's start with the front page of the Daily Nation before we get into the discussion this morning. Killer school owner still walking free. Justice delayed? That is the question they're asking on the Daily Nation today. A day after the tragedy, police are yet to make any arrests or hold anyone responsible for the loss of lives and injuries at Nairobi's Precious Talents Academy. Parents who lost their children recorded statements with the police yesterday. The story continues on page 4 and 5. The 8 bodies, pupils who perished, the post-mortem should be done within this week. Still on the front pages, I'm not scared of anybody, says Cohen widow. Giant NASA now staring at collapse. Linturi gave me a car and paid a bride price. That's according to Marianne Kitan's mother, who says that that was the condition that Linturi fulfilled to ensure that they were married. But still, let's stay away from that. The killer school owner still walking free, and this is where I'd like to get comments. And I'll start with you, Dr. Wandia. You're in the academic industry. What came to your mind when you saw all this? Is it that our priorities are twisted? Is it incompetence? Is it corruption? Where did we lose it?
My first feeling was grief, because when we take children to school, we are seeing life ahead of them. So for them to lose their lives at our school is such an irony, and it's an indictment of our society. That said, I am kind of not surprised that this is happening, because I think the public has abandoned education for children. We have left it to the privateers, and the problem with privateers is that they try to take shortcuts so that they can get maximum profit rather than maximum education. So things like this are bound to happen when money becomes the bigger interest in education rather than the education of our children.
Now there's a commission formed to ensure that all schools are structurally sound. Do you have confidence in that? Because this is not the first time the Ministry of Education is forming a commission.
No, this is just yet another commission. We'll get a report and nothing will happen. But I think the bigger issue is not even the structures. It's how much value do we put on education, and how committed are we to having schools for all children? This is a neighborhood that was just expanding and expanding. There was no land set aside for a school. And those are the questions we need to have, because if you set land aside for a school, and it will be a public school, then we can be able to have buildings. But if you leave it to private sector to put up a school for purpose of making money, they are going to cut corners. So I think the bigger question that needs to be asked is how many public schools do we have? And I saw Citizen did a good segment, I think, on public schools, how many have been built. I think that's the bigger question. How many more public schools are we building for the expanding population, because if we set aside land for our children, then it will be easier to manage the buildings.
Okay.
Yeah.
David, what do you think? Because now all of a sudden there's 20 million set aside for a public school to be built in Gando Ward, which is going to be the first one. And did we have to wait for a tragedy for this to happen?
So there are two realities here. The first is that most of the lands that were set aside for schools were grabbed. And I do not see someone boldly trying to reacquire the parcels that were set aside for schools. I am persuaded that in that area, there must have been land set aside for school. Where is it? Who has it? Who is the person who benefited from that theft? Secondly, in 2015, I remember a building collapsing in Kenya Pipeline, at the Pipeline Estate. And I remember Gidero as governor going there and the National Construction Authority talking tough and saying, we have marked all buildings for demolition that do not meet the standards. This is 3 years later, 4. None of that has happened. Lives are still at risk. Buildings still stand that still have people living in them. Our children have died. I have seen the owner of the school is still walking free, which tells you that, one, he is connected because he should have been held so that then he states who cleared the building. You know, from where did he get his clearances? Then we would get to the root of the problem and nab the perpetrators or the culprits in the system. But that's probably not going to happen. Well, I bet after this show, Kinoti will go for him. He probably doesn't know that this guy was roaming free. But that is just how much the system is rigged. Yeah. It's completely, it's a complete failure. It's unfortunate. And so my personal condolences to the families that lost these young ones. Yeah. As I have said in other fora before, you know, society does not envisage the loss of the younger ones. When a father, when a husband loses the wife, he becomes a widower. When a woman loses the husband, she becomes a widow. When children lose parents, they become orphans. But there is no language in the world that has a terminology for a parent who loses a child.
Wow.
Because it's not supposed to.
Because the world, by its very nature, is in such a way that the older generation paves way for the younger ones. So to lose young people is such a hurtful and painful experience. Okay. Yeah.
Joy, and I'd like to bring you in on this. And what, legally speaking, can the police go for the proprietor? Because there's also this argument that the institution is different from the owner. And then there's also what David Osian brought up, and it's 10,000 buildings that are condemned to be brought down. 742, if I'm not wrong, are in dire situations that are supposed to be brought down like yesterday. 750, and they've not been done yet. So we know that, and the reason is anytime a building is marked for demolition, the owners go to court, get a court injunction, therefore it cannot be brought down. So I'd like you to talk about those two issues. Can the police legally hold the proprietor? And what happens, how do you circumvent that system where people counter?
They rush to court.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have to be the devil's advocate here because the headline itself is misleading. Yeah. Killer school owner. You know, it sounds like he set out to kill children and they set up a school to kill children. I think even if he's culpable of anything, at worst it would be manslaughter. And that is involuntary, causing somebody else's death. Because it is beyond our thought that a man set up a building to trap children to kill them.
So it cannot be murder. That is ruled out.
It is not murder. It's an unfortunate situation. Okay. But I am also cognizant of the fact that before you make any arrests or charge anybody, you must do some investigations. This just happened the other day. I'm aware that he was taken in and he wrote a statement and then he was released. He might be rearrested when they're ready to arraign him in court. So roaming free, again, is a misleading headline, but I guess it sells the paper, so we live with it. But there is a process to be followed, which even if it was you found in the same situation, you would appreciate somebody taking time to investigate and find out what is actually going on. However, just off the bat, the quality of construction that was there, the fact that there had been warnings, teachers have talked about it, the children have talked about it, parents have talked about it, And he, being the proprietor, means he had a responsibility to ensure that the facilities in his compound were up to scratch, up to a certain standard. And clearly some corners were cut, clearly some things were not done up to speed. And that's where now what the point that David is making comes in handy, because it's not just the proprietor who's at fault here. The city council inspectors who approved the construction of buildings every step of the way bear the greatest responsibility as far as I'm concerned. Right now, if you went to your home and decided to demolish the wall and you want to put up another one, they'll be there within 20 minutes. Where are your approvals? Where are your what? These city council inspectors are very sly people. They'll even follow stones and lorries to find out, so they find out if you've got. So they're always on top of things. For them to have totally ignored such a thing means they were either complicit or negligent. So that is also part of what the investigators must be doing, trying to rope everybody into this discussion.
So it's not just the proprietor, it's all the people involved in the approvals and all that.
Yes, and at the end of the day, as well, as the people using the facilities, bore some responsibility as well.
Okay.
I had some parents saying that I came and I saw it buckling and I was told it was firewood. So
yes,
we also need to start demanding a little bit more. If I see a building is unsafe, I should say I'm not bringing my child, we're not paying any more fees as parents. Either you fortify this, or even the parents to volunteer. One Saturday they come in and do something about it, because it's our collective responsibility. I'm not exonerating the owner. I'm just saying there's no one person to blame here.
Okay.
All of us failed as children, and we all need to man up and adult up and to take responsibility for what happened in this school.
Okay. Bishop, what are your thoughts?
I think I concur with the sentiments that have come on board, that we need to take responsibility. I would go for the minister now, that we need to have a discussion with the minister and also the inspectorate in the Nairobi County, and the churches around and neighborhood, so that we get to the matter, to the depth of the matter, and advise this nation that when the president is selecting his ministers, they should learn what we call management by walking around, management by walking around. To start their ministry first by locating where the schools are, and with their staff walk around, certify whether the buildings or children are safe in those buildings, and now enter into the nitty-gritty of drawing a matrix that we need now to implement what we saw, and warn, so that the police don't have to come all the time to do our policing work. We are all policemen and men, but we employ Kinoti and the rest to do our work, but we need to be the policemen. So we need to police the society. And I think, as we say, it is a sad moment in our day, in our life. Let us condole with the family and send our condolences and do what we can to help the families, but let us rise from the ashes of despair and be hopeful that we will all now change the way we do our services and how we elect, how we put people in the offices. And I would also encourage and appeal to the county government to really be on spot.
All right.